Hi, welcome to Crypto Ramble. I'm Desiree. Today I'm speaking with Kapil, aka Joe Sky. I know him from both of our involvement with the Particl project, and we're going to be talking about one of our favorite topics, which is decentralized marketplaces and specifically what we call private markets. We're also going to be talking about use cases for private markets and then talk about some current events like the backed unexpected fallout from that, and also a bit more general, the narrative that is in the crypto space and specifically about Bitcoin as well. So welcome to the show. And the first thing I like to do is to ask who I'm talking to introduce themselves to you guys. I'm thinking, why don't you let them know, the audience, who you are, what you do, and where your interest comes from in crypto, decentralization, and private markets.
Okay, hey, hello. My real name's Dr. Kapil Amarasinghe. I'm actually an emergency medicine doctor. I've been practicing for close to 9 years. I'm pretty experienced in that field. I've been actively involved in cryptocurrency since around 2016, and I came into it through Ethereum. Now, I was actually aware of it back in 2012 in Bitcoin, and I cry sometimes that I never bought the 5K that I said I would at that time every day. But that's the point. I got into Ethereum. I found out about that randomly through basically through a random article on my Google newsfeed. Found the concept really fascinating. Saw a lot of future potential value as a technology in terms of helping the world, making it a more fundamentally efficient place. And I saw a lot of potential speculative value. So I entered into it as a speculative player. I knew nothing really about finance at the time. I think it's fair to say that I got lucky in terms of where I am, in terms of those choices that I made. But I found it so fascinating. I learned a lot about financial markets. I learned a lot about cryptocurrency markets. I've studied them fairly extensively over the last couple of years, and I think I have a fairly good understanding of how they work and why they work. So around how I got into Particl was around about that time, not long after I discovered Ethereum. I actually discovered one of the precursors to the Particl project, SDC, Shadow Cash, and I was really fascinated by the idea of a decentralized, fully private marketplace. I saw a lot of potential value in that concept, so I kind of kept a keen eye on that project for a while, and I sort of saw the direction it was kind of going in, which was towards a genuinely honest, privacy-centric protocol. And I saw a lot of general global use cases for that, so I've been a really passionate advocate for that project ever since. Now, that kind of leads us to our current point, where I've done a lot of articles, about Particl over the years, and I've sort of gradually, unofficially evolved into one of the community ambassadors. I'm based out in the UK, and I'm one of the UK community ambassadors for this project. So I'm always happy to talk about the Particl project or cryptocurrency or anything related to this field. It is fascinating.
Okay, that's a great intro and background. So first, I'd like to kind of define what we mean when we say private markets, and then how Particl relates to that.
So my idea of private markets is this. I've seen a lot of definitions of privacy, but the purest form is one where you don't need to provide any personal information to transact, i.e. the medium with which that you're transacting, it neither stores or records your personal details at any point. Now, Particl's come up with a really fascinating solution. It's taken e-commerce and given people the ability to buy and sell goods online without a single bit of personal detail. You just give a shipping address, which has to have nothing really to do with who you are. And I think that's really fascinating because, if you look at the old economy and then the modern economy and then the emergent economy, the old economy, going way back before banking, if you go to the old economy, it was very much barter-based, cash-based. It was very privacy-centric by nature. The transactions were essentially face-to-face. They were built on the trust and honor of people kind of meeting together, exchanging goods, etc. In order to go to the digital economy and exchange goods online, by default, because of the way the internet was structured, you needed to have sign-ups and you needed to have registrations. Personal data had to be stored in order to transact online. There was no real cash in hand system for this. But the advent of decentralization means that we now have the technology that allows you to effectively sort of transact almost cash in hand style, but without having to give up any personal information. I think that's really useful from a fraud protection point of view, from protecting yourself from exploitation from others' point of view. That is something that I find fascinating and I'm really passionate about, because it is really, really easy to get scammed and swindled. I mean, it takes the most rudimentary research to figure out just how easy it is to jack someone's personal data and then misuse it. And you see so many instances of it now with online service providers. Equifax is one that keeps coming to mind. Facebook, LinkedIn, all of these big service providers at some point have basically been hacked. And that means all of this private information has been taken over by potentially bad actors who can misuse it. And I think, if you're now providing a service for transacting goods where you don't have to give out a piece of information that's so fundamentally valuable to your identity, then I think there's a real value in that space.
Yeah, that's a great outline of why private markets are sort of necessary. It's actually going back to how things were when people used to transact with each other. I just want to mention for anyone listening who's not aware, even though you might watch my content, that the project that he mentioned, Particl, is first and foremost a privacy coin, just a currency that introduces fungibility into crypto. It uses the same technology that Monero uses, but it's based on Bitcoin. And then the Particl is building a marketplace, which is the first decentralized application being built on top of the platform. Just for a little bit of background, in case you don't know. But that was a great outline of that. And then could you go more into where you see the use case for these private markets? That's something that I thought we could really connect on, and also due to your background, you have some insight on specific use cases, and then also some general ones too.
So I think we have to let's address the Pandora's box of this, and let's get the easy ones out of the way. Okay, look, people can go ahead and say DNMs are is a potential use case, but I'll get into why Particl is really designed not for that. The use cases I actually see the Particl network for are business to business, business to consumer, enterprise level applications. So for me, I like to think of this in terms of intellectual property, supply chains, and manufacturing processes. Now, if I am a manufacturer of a fairly niche or high-end good, what Particl is going to allow me to do, that this feature should be out by the end of the year, is it will allow me to set up a market on the Particl network, and that market will have its own unique address. And the only people that could see that market would be people who possess that address. So it's only that can just be a private market between me and my trusted suppliers. So it could just be my marketplace, and I have a network of suppliers, and I just want to transact with them in a way that no one else can see what's going on. So if I'm a manufacturer, I can set up various contracts between these guys, and I don't have to worry about industrial espionage, corporate sabotage. I can effectively mask my manufacturing and supply chain from my competitors. From an R&D point of view, if I've got intellectual property that's extremely useful, say if I'm a chef, okay? If I'm a chef and I have a secret sauce or a magical recipe where the ingredients must be completely hidden at all costs, I could set up a private market, one-to-one private markets with each of my suppliers, because this network can support potentially an infinite number of private markets on it. So I could have I could have 20 markets as a manufacturer of this special food item, And each market could be, if it's got 20 ingredients, one market to each supplier for that good. And that's a private channel between me and that supplier that no one else will necessarily need to know exists unless that supplier somehow decides to give that away, or unless I give the address for that marketplace away. So that's a feature that really excites me. So it's the protecting your intellectual property. I think that's highly relevant, in an era where you've got large companies, potentially like Amazon, who have all the power in the world to do data analytics on the businesses operating on their networks, and then look and analyze the supply chains. They've got all this power where they could potentially engage in potential I'm not saying they do, but they have all the power to potentially analyze successful businesses, replicate.
They do this. This is known. They completely mine the data on their platform in order to make their own version of it and sell it. So this is something that Amazon does do, for sure.
Yeah. And this is it for me. If you're a small business trying to grow and succeed, that is not something you need. If you've got something precious and unique to protect, that is not something you need to be worrying about if you want to stay competitive. I say that's of particular interest to me. If you and I feel that's a big white hat case for this network. Mm-hmm. I think that the potential for it is huge. It's in the trillions or more. I think it's a liquidity expander for anyone who understands that concept. I think it could.
What does that mean?
So it's the idea that it could. Without going into a full explanation of liquidity, it's the idea that this network, if knowledge of this functionality was well enough known, and this network gained sufficient traction and became the de facto service provider for this sort of feature, because to my knowledge, at this moment in time, it's the only network in the world that's actually developing or even close to deploying something like this, then the amount of potential business it could attract is huge. And as a liquidity multiplier, the amount of speculative interest that would then generate on top. If you look at liquidity in terms of market cap and market cap in terms of circulating supply times speculative spot price per token, the speculative token determined by traders on an exchange market, I think you'd see a lot of organic usage, and then on top of that, you'd see a lot of speculative interest. I'm going to just go back to Bitcoin and just go into a little bit of history. If you're around in 2012, you know about the Silk Road. You know that Bitcoin was the de facto currency of the Silk Road, and you knew that that was an organic use case for it. Now, that wasn't necessarily a great organic use case. It's not one that I condone. It's one that I'm aware of. But the fact that it succeeded in that drew speculators in. Speculators and traders and people who are interested in finance could look at that and say, okay, that is a speculative currency tool that's working. We can build an infrastructure around this. So, you go to NTGOX and you look at the sudden speculative price bumps as traders and financiers get interested in that market, and it suddenly goes to $1,200, starts crashing along. But in that period of time where it's crashing in price over a period of a year from 1,200 all the way to 100, you've got massive development of infrastructure to support Bitcoin as a currency network. Now it's evolved more into store of value network. We'll get into that later. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, going back to the idea of a liquidity multiplier, and this is a bit of a ramble, crypto ramble. I'm of the view that cryptocurrencies will expand global liquidity. They will enable more free flow of trade. They will reduce friction of trade, and therefore they will increase trading velocity. That increase in trading velocity will increase the amount of speculative and organic value that's exchanged, and that will lead to raising of market caps across the board for various entities, speculative or otherwise. So if we look at Bitcoin's market cap, that a few years ago was a fraction of what it is now. If you project 10 years into the future, I think it will be potentially much larger. And you can apply this to standard economics as well. The global economy, whether you want to believe it or not, overall has grown exponentially if you look at it over a 50, 60-year time frame or a 100-year time frame. Most obvious point of reference would be the S&P 500. Just look at that curve on a lifetime, and you'll see what I mean. And that's because people are generating goods, people are generating value. Therefore, the amount of value that's going up, effectively the amount of currency that must be generated is also going up proportionate to that. And yeah, people complain about currency inflation, but as long as the amount of organic value relative to currency inflation is kind of the same, then you've effectively got liquidity expansion. So in a roundabout way, I hope that made sense. I believe Particl could be a liquidity expander, especially for small businesses looking to grow organically and looking to, maybe resist absorption or monopolization from people that may be looking to cannibalize them.
No, that's a great explanation. I think at least this wasn't something until I started learning more about, say, business or finance, mostly in school, but outside of school as well. It's not something that's very intuitive to people, that because humans are generating more goods and services, that means that you'll need more currency to help facilitate that exchange. It seems very static in the minds.
Or aspect of value. If your currency inflation matches the growth in organic value, it's great. It's when currency inflation goes way beyond what a country is organically producing, that's when it becomes problematic. There are examples being places like Zimbabwe or Venezuela or Germany back in the late 30s. Those are examples where monetary policy went haywire. I don't want to go too far into this. I hate the concept of quantitative easing. I think that's our modern fancy version of hyperinflation. I think it's just really good marketing for hyperinflation in the West. But anyway, yeah, yes, spot on.
Yeah, I just want to say that it's not intuitive that market caps just for countries, you could think of countries or companies around the world, will probably continue to rise. That's not a very intuitive concept for people. And I like the phrase you use about reducing the friction of trade. And I also want to frame this discussion about competition as a small business, not just with the platform that you're on, that's one issue, but also with other people. When you have a private market that you were describing, you can protect that knowledge just between you and your suppliers. Maybe you could sign some contracts, and then the marketplace would facilitate the enforcement of that contract as well, because then it's only between you and those sellers. And I wanted you to kind of talk about something I've heard you mention before, because you might be more familiar with it, in terms of supply chains, the medical industry.
So this is an area I'm fascinated in, and it goes into real grey market territory. But I think there's an ethical argument for this. Now, if you live in the States, which I believe you do, you're in, the cost of a drug, there's a really good series on Netflix, by the way, called Dirty Money. And there's an episode in that series which focuses on Valiant, which basically bought up pharmaceuticals companies to effectively get the patents to those drugs, and then just jacked up the price of those drugs massively. Now, those same drugs would be available in generic versions for a massive fraction of the price. So there was one drug example where I think it was for a rare disorder, hemochromatosis. That drug in the States had suddenly gone from $100 to $10,000, pretty virtually overnight. Now that same drug, if you look around, you can get that for like a couple of dollars. You go to India, you're going to get that for a couple of dollars. You go to the UK, you get that for about 10, 20 quid. I'm not going to give exact numbers, but this is the kind of proportions we're talking for. So a company that can charge $10,000 for an essential life-saving drug that is designed specifically to prevent serious degeneration and disability, if a company can charge $10,000 for that legally in one jurisdiction, even if that's ethically abhorrent and immoral, from your viewpoint, being able to then purchase that exact same drug from another country for a few cents, and that can then lead to a massively marked improvement in that person's long-term quality of life, I think that's a bit of a no-brainer, regardless of what the rules are, internationally. And I think networks like this should give people who exploit our inability to arbitrage effectively or exploit customs rules for malicious uses, even if they're legal. You know, okay, the guy wants to make money, I can understand that. But if people are using that to exploit value, to artificially inflate value, to exploit others, I think networks like this, I like the idea of people then, I like the idea of someone in the Far East or in India with a legitimate pharmaceuticals firm who creates genuine working generic medications, then being able to ship that across to countries where those exact same drugs are 10,000 times more expensive and give them to people who need them. I see a real genuine ethical argument for it in terms of foreign aid, in terms of aid. Okay, mm-hmm. If you look at the transmission of aid between nations, between NGOs and countries, or between charities and the places they operate in, if you look at the ground level, there's usually a lot of intermediaries who want little cuts on the side, who want their bribes. I think networks like this allow you to create direct channels between the consumers who need those goods, the people who need those goods, and the people who are providing them, and then bypass entities that may wish to exploit or pervert that process. So I think networks like Particl have a tremendous amount of potential, of ethical good potential. So that's where I stand.
Right. A great point. Something I thought maybe you could expand on, something that I was thinking about recently, was the fact that our world is becoming more global. And when you buy a product, generally you have parts made in different parts of the world, or one part is manufactured somewhere, or it's all assembled in the end country. And so there's a global supply chain behind most of the products that we use today. And I was just wondering if you could give some insight into how private marketplaces could help with facilitating that movement over borders.
Okay, so essentially what a private market does is it creates a form of private settlement. So if I'm using, say, a network like Particl, and if I've purchased a good on there, there is no third party that can, firstly, because of Ring CT and CT, all the transactions on the Particl network are effectively anonymized. So if you put an order, the buyer, seller, and amounts are effectively blinded from third-party analysis. So if you are a formal auditor or government agency or corporation that's analyzing these transactions, all you're going to just see is flows of amounts, but you don't see what goods are being transacted with who. So then it becomes a question of, then it's a case of, really, okay, the settlement is effectively happening in a manner that's very independent of direct overview. So I guess in terms of facilitating global trade, it then comes down to just shipping the thing. And then when you're looking at shipping, I kind of think about more customs. I think it will basically, I think networks like this, if they gain traction, I believe they will, I think they will put a real focus and onus on customs if you're going to start regulating the flow of goods, rather than actually internal auditing and oversight of supply chain. I guess it will just allow greater free flow of settlement. Okay, it will actually allow greater free flow of goods. But I feel that in terms of the global supply chains, I feel that's very much going to be dependent on local customs services and local customs procedures and the funding that goes into those services. So I think it will put an onus on them. But what was sort of going through your head with that?
I was thinking that a lot of the times, say if I come up with a product idea and it's a physical product, and it's cheapest to get it manufactured in some Asian country, like say China or Vietnam, for example, a lot of the times the person who is not from there and they go there to try and do business, they're reliant on their producer and supplier over there not producing for someone else, or using the knowledge that they have now about this product that the person who came up with the idea is going to is going to markets where they are. So I feel as if somehow I mentioned it earlier, but I was thinking more in terms of globalization and cultural issues that make it harder to know what's going on. They could still, not respect what this person's idea is, the entrepreneur. However, it's easier to enforce any sort of NDA contracts between parties because the medium of exchange allows it. So that's what I was thinking.
Okay, no, I see what you're getting at. And this goes back earlier to what I was saying about intellectual property and essentially protecting it, which is, if you're on a network where you don't need to know anything about the person you're transacting with and they don't need to really know anything about you, all you've got is your shipping address, the most analysis in theory you can really do is where those goods are going to. You don't really know what they're being used for. You don't know what that they're meant for. So I agree with you. I think it can facilitate, by protecting intellectual property in that way, I think it can actually facilitate global trade in numerous ways. And I think it can speed up that flow. Because I think, as you said, you're right. People do spend a lot of time trying to find ways to protect their privacy. There's usually an extensive cost involved with it. There's usually a lot of trust, a lot of research. You have to find people that you trust. You then have to make sure they have enough reputation, or you have to sometimes test them, see that they can live up to their ends of deals. Even if you trust that person, you still don't know until something's gone through. Whereas on networks like Particl, which are effectively automated and remove the need for any sort of trusted intermediaries. Just want to go into this actually. The escrow model for Particl, it's just buyer and seller only, so that there's no human third party in that escrow overseeing it, and there's no commission either. So essentially, it's a commission-free escrow where buyer puts a deposit, seller puts a deposit, and if the goods are received in great order, buyer and seller get their deposit back. But if either the buyer or the seller don't, think that this has happened, then both of them lose their deposits. I think that's a really powerful concept, because that's what facilitates the backbone of allowing you to buy and sell goods online without knowing anything about each other. And that's essentially, at the same time, you don't have the commission associated with traditional third-party escrow. And you have to go through the process of finding those trusted third-party human escrows or vetting them, because it's all automated on the underlying technology of the Particl blockchain. So I think, I agree with you. I think there's a great use case there. And going back to friction, I think by removing those barriers, I think you can speed up the rate of exchange, and in turn, by speeding up that rate of exchange, speed up the rate of value and the rate of production. So I think it can improve global production, and I think networks like this can be a factor towards improving our global economy.
Right. I just want to mention the title, because I think it's cool for what Kapor was just describing in terms of Particl's escrow service. It's called Mad Escrow for Mutually Assured Destruction Escrow, and it's based on game theory, exactly what he was just describing. So I think that's all I could really think of to talk about specifically in terms of private markets. Is there anything else you think we could mention before we move on to the more current stuff?
I think they're great. I'm really looking forward to it. The Particl network's already live, so you can actually download you can download a desktop client to Windows, Linux, or Macs and access. There's currently just the one marketplace, but they're building that market management feature that will allow you to effectively build an infinite number of markets on the Particl network and switch between them. So I'm looking forward to that. And I think we've discussed a fairly broadly, we've discussed an extensive number of cases. I suspect that as networks like this grow, and I'm convinced a network of this nature will succeed, which is why I'm so strongly behind Particl, I think we'll see numerous other good use cases evolve, things that people I don't think would have expected.
Yeah, I just want to put this out there to the audience. Depending on what industry you work in, for example, if you can think of anything, just hearing this conversation and the features we've described, where private markets could be applied, anything we didn't think of, I would be very curious to hear about other use cases that we haven't thought of ourselves. So we also wanted to discuss a bit more current events and more general topic. And the first one is about Bakkt and what happened there.
Oh my God.
So first of all, describe very briefly what it is, just in case people don't know, and then like what your thoughts are.
Okay. So Bakkt is basically a trading platform. We'll call it a trading platform. So what Bakkt would allow you to do, or what Bakkt would allow people to do, is it was basically registered with certain agencies and authorities. Let's treat it like a company. And what it would then say is, okay, they would be licensed and authorized to take money from various investment firms that might be representing special groups with very large sums of money, say, pension pots, or, certain sort of long-standing trust funds, certain long-standing institutional investment profiles, basically really large sums of money that are regulated to only be invested in certain very safe ways with certain very strict rules. The Bakkt would effectively allow that sort of money to enter the cryptocurrency space. So the excitement about Bakkt was that, okay, when Bakkt goes live, we're going to get loads of people who run hedge funds for pensioners putting money to buy Bitcoin, as a digital gold and store it. So there was a lot of speculative hype, because Bitcoin, it went to 20K and then it crashed to 3K. And it's been gradually building back up again, and it was at 10K. And people, if you go to Bitcoin markets and you go look like online, there's a general trend within people in those circles to go, here's the bull case for the near future. Bakkt is launching. We're going to get a whole influx of new money buying Bitcoin where it normally wouldn't have been able to. Retail investors who may have been afraid of buying Bitcoin directly might go through these services, might go through intermediaries to then buy Bitcoin, using Bakkt as a custodian, etc. And that's huge sums of money, potentially again, certainly in the billions, potentially in the trillions. So there's a lot of anticipation there. But then, I was on nights. I was working A&E nights, and literally, I think I checked the price like once a day. Like, I skim a forum or two nowadays. I'm fairly busy, and I just looked. I was like, what? 25% down in it? Like, I just looked. I was like, what? Why did the price of Bitcoin go down 25%? And I had no idea what was going on. And then I realized that Bakkt futures had been released literally just before that happened. And I had no understanding until I knew that was just after Bakkt had been released. And then I realized, it was a sell the news event. It was a really classic case of, there were a bunch of people who clearly thought, let's short this. I suspect this is probably a really well coordinated short position by some of the larger players and the institutional players and people who've been in the money game for a while. I suspect a ton of them had pre-planned short positions because I suspect they anticipated that the amount of money moving into Bitcoin for a long position via Bakkt was probably nowhere near enough to justify the size of the short position they could physically take out. And we saw that, 25% in a day. What would have likely happened is they would have immediately launched a bunch of short positions together. That would have dropped the price of Bitcoin. That would have triggered stop losses via bots trading on the exchanges, or via stop losses from retail and other holders. That would then trigger a further sell-off. That would then trigger a series of cascading stop losses and that would trigger a cascading, crash. Basically, you've seen this before. If you've ever seen any of the flash crashes that happened in crypto, I remember when Ethereum went, was it from, I can't remember if it was $300 to 20 cents or something. I can't remember, because literally I think it was on Kraken, someone initiated a $2 million short position or something silly. They used leverage with 2 million as the principal, and they were able to just crash the price instantly before it rocked back up. And it's essentially a similar thing that happened here. We should not assume, take retail sentiment, go ask 100 people, would they buy Bitcoin? If you can get like 50 or 75% of people saying, yeah, something like Backed is a great idea for now, for an immediate launch. But if you ask them now, I think retail sentiment is still being crushed from the last bull run when Bitcoin went to 20K and literally every single alt. I remember I was mining one called Hushcoin. I was mining that for $1, and I knew it was a total. I just didn't think much of it. But it went to $20. That should have been my signal to sell everything, because you need. Anyway, a lot of retail investors were buying Bitcoin at a local peak. I'm calling it a local peak because I'm a long-term bull on crypto. They got burned. A lot of these people are relatively naive to investing. A lot of them lack discipline. A lot of traders are emotional. A lot of newcomers are emotionally driven. People, by their nature, tend to be quite emotionally driven. So I think a lot of people, retail-wise, got burned. Now, a platform like Backed, directly and indirectly, is meant to appeal to the retail crowd. And I think here's my criticism of Bitcoin as it is. It was meant to be a currency, and at some point along the way it became a store of value. So instead of being a thing that facilitated the flow of transactions, which in turn would facilitate the generation and flow of value, it became a storing point like gold. And that's a good thing, because gold is, okay, yes, it's good to store value, but when you're storing value, you're not generating it. Now,
right.
That means that's a niche market. Gold is a niche market. It's longer in its history, culturally, but it's a niche market. The broader investment market is much bigger than gold. So when Bitcoin chooses to box itself in by being digital gold, and I think that's a use case, and I think it has room to grow, but it limits itself. I don't think it has as much room to grow as I think it should have, if it would as it would have if it stuck the course for its original intentions. So I think there's a limit to how much Bitcoin can grow. I think there's a limit to how much attention Backed can attract. And I think Backed will attract interest over time. I think as the idea of Bitcoin is more understood, I think as the idea of digital gold is better understood. I'm not talking about tokenized gold. I think that's trash. Okay, I won't go down that road, but I think Bitcoin as a concept of being digital gold, as in having no requirement for a physical location, but serving the same function as gold, I think that has got a value in this space. I just don't think it's as big as the Bitcoin crowd think it should be. And I think that's the great misconception. And for me, I'm more, what are you going to create? Right? If you're going to attract people, what are you going to create? If I'm an artist, my value is based on what I create. If I create a load of great paintings that people value, that's me generating and bringing value into this world. If I'm a squirrel storing acorns, okay, that allows me to get fat on acorns, but that doesn't really do anything for anyone else. That's not a draw for other people to come visit my tree full of acorns. Oh, hey, do you want to check out my acorn-filled tree? No, thanks, I've got other things to do. And that's where my position is.
I agree with you, but I would say I do think that Bitcoin has become de facto digital gold because it, at least in its current version, it can't scale to the point of being used just as a day-to-day currency with low enough transaction fees for the average, which is most people not in the US, individual. However, from what I understand from conversations I've had with people who are very much into Bitcoin, they still think that Bitcoin is a currency and that is what they are championing it for its use case as, even though we're saying, from what I just said, that actually it's not for the average person the way it is now. So I would just say that as a kind of supporting statement to what you were saying. And then you were talking about backed. So I just very briefly read something about it, and I think it was like 60,000 trade volume on the first day of opening. It was like super low. It was something in the thousands, and that was very disappointing. Were you saying when you were describing institutional investors probably having deciding to short Bitcoin? Were you saying that people knew beforehand that BACS wouldn't have as high volume as other people expected, and so they decided to set up a stop loss beforehand? Or are you saying that people first heard about the news and then decided to sell when they realized, oh, this isn't going to be as big and bringing as much newcomers as we thought? Because that's kind of a confusing thing in my head.
I think, and it's different from both. So if I was working for JP Morgan, I would have considerable financial resources at hand, and I'd have the ability to do research beforehand. Now, if I was a broker for JPM, here's what I would do. I would gauge retail sentiment and do some research and basically do some models predicting how much money I expect would flow into BACT on its first day of trading. And then I'd get a rough figure. And then I'd go, how much money do I have on hand? Okay. If it's a huge amount of money that's going to come in, if my research indicates a ton of money is going to come into this service, then I guess I'd set myself up for a long position. If I think very little money is going to come in, but I can see the sentiment of the local trading market is bullish, then I would be inclined to set up a short position. Now, if I wanted to amplify the chances of my short position being successful, I might coordinate or collude. I don't want to say collude, but I might coordinate, because that's making accusations. But I might, and I'm just using JPM as hypothetical, not as an actual example. But I might coordinate and collude with other parties and share that research, and may access other parties' research who are looking at the same thing. And if we come to the same conclusion, we might decide, hey, let's just jointly agree we're going to short this thing on this day, and that we'll use this much capital, and we'll put a decent leverage weighting, like 10-fold leverage, and set our own stop loss, and that will totally overwhelm whatever money's going in via the long position. It will scare the crap out of all the retail investors. It will cause the price to drop. Anyone who already has stop losses in place, those will get triggered. It will allow me to then reopen my shorts and keep going and going and going until we find the next real support. I think that's what happened.
Well, what do you think of the theory that a little birdie told me, that it was perhaps this whole thing was set up in order to fight Bitcoin because BACT has ties to governments that may not want Bitcoin to really exist at all, and so they were probably hoping to do what you described. Just a theory that I heard, to an even larger scale, to like shake the confidence in Bitcoin as a currency. What do you think of that theory?
If governments were that smart, I think they'd be going after Facebook Libra a lot harder. I can believe that. I believe that there are probably some governments that aren't that. I could believe that. I could believe that. Okay, I think that's possible. I'm not going to disagree with you. I think that's a possibility.
It's honestly a theory that I heard. Like, I never came up with it.
Theory, I could buy into that as a narrative. I personally think what my view, which is it's relatively easy if you've got access to the resources to do the research and model the predictions and make an educated guess. I think it's very easy to go down the road of conspiracy theories. I have rolled in a lot of circles. I will tell you this, governments, they're not that smart. You just have to look at Fox, look at CNN. I Google Donald Trump every day because it gives me a laugh. A good sadistic, ironic laugh every day from that. And I feel, if you work in organizations, in large ones, you very quickly realize that they're not that bright. I work in the NHS. I've worked in the NHS for 10 years. I can tell you now, there are a lot of people that aren't that bright, but they happen to hold significant positions of power. So I think giving that too much credit, I would say, let's look at the path of least resistance. Let's look at how the world generally works day to day. People do research, people make predictions, people do modeling, and people make educated guesses. That's how science and society works. And if you go with me, that's where I'm going with. There are going to be some governments that might be interested in not having Bitcoin around, but actually there are going to be governments that are interested in having Bitcoin around as well. I suspect if you want a real geopolitical answer from my point of view, if you look, Mark Carney, Governor of the Bank of England, very recently in the last few months basically said we need to start digitizing our currencies. I don't know if this was fake news.
It wasn't fake. I read through the whole thing. It wasn't fake news. He really said that.
Did he say something about Ethereum or something? Because that might be the fake news.
No, he didn't say about Ethereum. He didn't even mention crypto, but he said something very similar to crypto. I can't remember the exact term. He came up, it was like a world hegemonic reserve currency that was like digital. So he just described a currency that was like a cryptocurrency, and that would be very useful because a lot of emerging markets around the world are currently so dependent on what happens to the US as a global reserve currency, and it's not reliable. So that's basically what he said in a nutshell. Yeah. And
that's exactly my point. He's a smart man, and he realizes that the political situation in the US has made people very nervous internationally. No one's going to pretend or lie if you speak to people privately who aren't directly dealing with those guys. And from where I stand, for Mark Carney to openly say that says to me that he's fundamentally supportive of the idea of digital currencies, or even a neutral currency to act as a reserve to avoid the geopolitical bullshit that happens on a day-to-day basis. People want to negotiate with each other without having to kind of step around the niceties that we sometimes have to give when presented with the platitudes of so-called greatness. Sorry, that was me rambling.
No. I think what you said definitely had merit. I do think. Oh, there was one more thing I wanted to say, but I can't remember. I don't know if you heard, because I don't remember the name of it, but there was another platform, not backed, but had higher volume, way more, like in the millions than backed did. Did you hear about it?
It's not Grayscale Invest. It's not the Grayscale GBTC, is it?
No, I don't think so. It was like something very legit.
It's up next. They've not launched, I think.
Who?
I can't remember, but they had more volume. Yeah, what happened?
I don't remember. It was just, I thought maybe you had heard about it and could say some more. But there was another platform that was also like futures contracts for Bitcoin. And they had much more volume than Back did. And I thought, well, even if Back didn't do well, there was some other platform that did, so it shouldn't really dampen a positive sentiment towards Bitcoin. But I'm not sure what I'm talking about, so forget about it. I just thought, like I heard it.
So we've already had ETFs. We've already had the ETFs released. We've already got synthetics for trading Bitcoin on stocks, on regular stock markets. They're there. I don't really spend too much time worrying or thinking about that. I personally am not a big fan of synthetics as a concept. I think they're dangerous. I think they created a lot of problems historically for the last 10 years or further. But no, it's happened. And it just goes back to my original point, which is that I think, you want me to give you the controversial view? My personal controversial view is I think this crash has the potential to be bullish for something like Ethereum. And the humanists are going to hate me if I go down this line of argument. And it just goes back to why I went into Ethereum in 2016 as opposed to Bitcoin, which is that I can see how smart contracts, and I can see the sorts of structures that smart contracts create. And I keep an eye on DeFi. Anyone who's watching this, I'm a big fan of MakerDAO. I don't hold MKR tokens. I think it's one of the best concepts ever. And some of the other products in the Ethereum ecosystem, I think tokenized real estate, which is going on in the, if we do another podcast, if we do another discussion, I will discuss Ethereum. I will discuss valuations. I think Ethereum has a very, very low fundamental value. They'll hate me if I talk about Ethereum at length, but I'm going to flash for now.
No, I
think has a much better speculative future than a lot of people may put it out to be. And I think that's because things like tokenized real estate's being done on ERC20. I think that's because you've got MakerDAO, decentralized finance, decentralized loans, decentralized credit scoring, decentralized. There are so many, good verification. There's so many different use cases that have been pioneered, developed, or actively innovated on that chain that are generating value or creating efficiencies, not creating inefficiencies, but creating efficiencies, which in turn creates value and accelerates exchange and creates liquidity. I think if we're going to look towards, I feel like I'm losing my own point here. I don't think we can keep using store of value as an ongoing push case argument for something to keep going up in value. At the end of the day, if you look at it, there's a point where it becomes a greater fool's argument, and then the price stabilizes. And if it's culturally gained enough relevance and value, and I think Bitcoin has, I think Bitcoin's a very good form of digital gold, and I think it will grow from here. But where it grows to is a matter of ongoing, predictions. But when it gets to that place, where does it go from there? And I think it comes down to what is it doing, or what can it create?
Okay. I was going to say that I think that's a great idea for a potential next topic together, is to discuss Ethereum. I would say, just to put it out there, that from what I understand, Ethereum also faces similar issues to Bitcoin in terms of scaling as well. So I think that's something that can change over time. Like, even if right now a network is struggling, and maybe it seems even not going down paths that could help with scaling, I'm thinking about Bitcoin, that can shift in the future. So I don't want to start that argument now or discussion now, but
before we both get blamed, I just want to say I'm optimistic that both will achieve scalability. I'm optimistic that both will overcome their challenges. So that's my.
Okay. Well, that's good, because we should wrap up now. Just to kind of summarize, we talked about private markets and or both of our favorite coin, and the only one that we really know of that's doing it in this way, which is totally based on the tech and not in human intervention to create a trustless system. And then also about use cases, and we talked about the back crash, and then we also discussed a bit the general crypto space and Bitcoin, and how we see that working out in the future. So do you have any last words or anything you want to let people know?
Crypto Ramble, it's been great. Buy Particl, buy Par.
Okay. Well, I won't say that, but I think that Particl is an awesome coin. As you know, it's in my tagline, like I'm all about Particl. So thanks for coming on and sort of discussing this. I think that private markets, decentralized marketplaces can really change the face of how people trade and do commerce with each other. And like you mentioned in the beginning, it's really a going back to how things were before in terms of fungibility and the using cash, and the or new digital world doesn't have to remove that fundamental, what I think human right, which is privacy. So thank you for watching. You can follow me on Twitter. You can also find Joe on Twitter. I'm not sure what your handle is. And you can go read up more on Particl at particl.io. You can also find this video on other video platforms as well. So thank you and have a good day, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks.